welcome to Lit Valentine. It's my pleasure to welcome you all once again to my channel. Today, with this positive vibe, let us begin with our day. Let's see some of the idioms which can improve your vocabulary. Get your act together, meaning you need to improve your behavior. Get your act together, meaning you need to improve your behavior. If you want to utter that or state that you need to improve your behavior to someone, or you want to point out somebody that instead of using the common words which you are using in your daily day life, you can use the idiom get your act together. With this, let's move on to the next slide. Penny for your thoughts, meaning asking someone what is in their minds. Penny for your thoughts, meaning asking someone what is in their minds. If you want to point out or ask somebody that what is in their minds or the words related to this synonym, you can use the idiom penny for your thoughts. Cry over spilled milk. It means regret. Regret in the sense feeling sorry. If you want to ask someone that why are you feeling regret, instead of using the same words like regret or feeling sorry, you can use the idiom cry over spilled milk. With this, let's today. So far we had seen about Edmund Spenser, and from today we are going to focus on Philip Sidney, one of the most important writer in the period of Renaissance, my dear friends. So today we are going to focus on Sidney. Here, as I am mentioning in all my episodes, that all the key points will be illustrated in a detailed manner, so don't want to worry about that. So let's see about that birth of Sidney. If you take Sidney, he is the greatest chivalric humanist courtier of Elizabeth's court. And Philip Sidney was 10 years elder than Shakespeare, which I mentioned in the previous video. He was born in 1554 and Shakespeare was born in the year 1564. So you can keep this sort of method in your mind, which can help you to attend the vocabulary and as well as the chronological order in an easy way. If you take Philip Sidney, he was 10 years elder than Shakespeare because Sidney was born in the year 1554 and Shakespeare was born in the year 1564. And he was born in a very big aristocratic family. His younger sister Mary Herbert became Countess of Pembroke. He was also a soldier and died very young. He got a wound and died very young, and all the works of Philip Sidney were wrote under the posthumously. He wrote, his works were published posthumously, my dear friends, keep that in mind, and none of his works were published in his lifetime. Sidney, when he lived, was part of a circle of thinkers, scholars and writers, and the name of the circle or group which Sidney belongs is called Areopagus, which I mentioned here. He was influential in Queen Elizabeth's court, and this Queen Elizabeth announced occasionally that he might marry this nobleman or that nobleman. She managed men and matters, and this was a matter of politics and power. The courtiers did not let her marry whoever she wanted. Sidney was once interfered and he was banished from Queen Elizabeth's court. After some time he came back. When he was banished, he lived in Countess of Pembroke's house, his own sister Mary Herbert's house, and that is where his first work was written, the prose major romance, that is Arcadia. Arcadia is actually a classical text which based on Jacopo Sannazaro, published in 1580. If you take Jacopo Sannazaro, he written the work called Arcadia, and it was Sidney's influential. He had written the work Arcadia. Okay. Sidney rewrote Arcadia. Arcadia was a major prose romance. The entire title is Countess of Pembroke Arcadia. It was written in 1580, published after Sidney, which he died in 1586. If you take Philip Sidney, he died in 1586 and the Arcadia was published in 1580. Arcadia is the story of Count Basilius, his wife Gynecia, their daughters Amala and Philoclea, and they are in love with two men. This story is taken from Sannazaro Arcadia, and this is a story of love as well as war. Now he is talking about different kinds of love here, different kinds of policies here. Sydney completely rewrote Arcadia. There are actually two versions of Arcadia, that is Old Arcadia and New Arcadia. It is from New Arcadia the story of Cloister is taken by Shakespeare to King Lear. King Lear has a subplot, the story of a blind cloister, that is taken from New Arcadia of Sydney. Then there is a sonnet sequence called Astrophil and Stella. It has 108 sonnets and 11 songs. If you take astro, the word astro means star, and Astrophil is called a star lover. And who is the star here? It is Stella. Penelope Devereux, the wife of Lord Rich. This was the courtly love convention. The hero is always in love with somebody else's wife because the love is never consummated, no fulfillment will be here. If you take Astrophil and Stella, it is remembered as the first sonnet sequence in English. Sydney's niece is also a poet. Sydney's niece is also a greatest writer. She has also written a sonnet sequence. It is called Phamphilia to Amphilanthus, which I mentioned here. Phamphilia to Amphilanthus is the work of Lady Mary Worth, Sydney's niece. Astrophil and Stella is more about the sufferings of the lover than about love itself. And these poems became the foundation for sonneteering in England at that time. Astrophil and Stella has a preface written by the university wit Thomas Nash. Okay, keep that in mind. Astrophil and Stella has a preface written by the university wit Thomas Nash. And an apology for poetry is also a most of Spencer. It is also called as the defense of poesy. It is actually a critical work by Sidney. In the Renaissance period, there was a lot of critical activity. There were a group of critics in Cambridge. They were also called as the Tudor Trio. They are Roger Ascham, Thomas Wilson and John Check. And there were other critics like John Puttenham, the author of The Art of English Poesy. Then there was Thomas Campion, who wrote Observations in the Art of English Poesy. In the Renaissance period, there was a lot of critical activity. There were a group of critics in Cambridge. They were also called as the Tudor Trio. They are Roger Ascham, Thomas Wilson and John Check. And there were also other critics like George Puttenham, the author of The Art of English Poesy. Then there was Thomas Campion, who wrote Observations in the Art of English Poesy. He attacked rhyme there, and a reply was written by Samuel Daniel in the defense of rhyme. It is in the climate of criticism that you should understand or place Sidney's Apology for Poetry. It was published under the two titles in the same year, 1595. Apology for Poetry was written as a reply to the Puritan attack on poetry by Stephen Gosden, right? Once again, I repeat it. Thomas Campion is famous for his work Observations in the Art of English Poesy. Then here he attacked rhyme there, and a reply was written by Samuel Daniel in the defense of rhyme. It is in the climate of criticism that you should understand or place Sidney's Apology for Poetry work here. It was published in the same year 1595. If you take Apology for Poetry, it was written as a reply to the Puritan attack on poetry by Stephen. Then if you take Stephen Gosden attacked the poets, pipers, players and the caterpillars of the Commonwealth. Okay. If you take the Commonwealth, it is like the rose. These poets are like the caterpillars who are destroying the rose. Stephen Gosden was also a Puritan. That's why he attacked poetry like that. Sidney defends poetry. He talks about the antiquity of poetry, the universality of poetry, the wide respectability of poetry, and he defines poetry as the art of imitation. Plato and Aristotle both he evoked, my dear friends, and he famously said poetry is a speaking picture with the end to teach and delight. Teach means to instruct and delight means gives pleasure, the two functions of poetry. And he based his ideas on three Italian critics. They were called as Aristotelians. Minturno, Scaliger and Castelvetro. Based on them, Sidney said there are three main kinds of poetry. If you take religious poetry praises God, and philosophical poetry that teaches you, and the creative kind. The imaginative kind is the true kind, the third kind of poetry. It can be further subdivided into several categories like heroic poetry, iambic poetry, pastoral poetry, epic poetry, satiric and comic, etc. All of these kinds have its own uses, and Sidney is praising poetry because he is lamenting because poetry has fallen value because nobody is using poetry well these days. People have an earth creeping mind these days. They are not able to look up at the sky of poetry. Sidney wanted to raise the standards of poetry. He was a classicist. He did not like tragic comedy because he lived before the golden age of tragic comedy that came at the end of the Elizabethan period and the beginning of the Jacobean period. An apology for poetry ends with remarks on style, versification, and diction. Sidney did not write more, my dear friends. He was a great famous man. He was a patron of many other poets. Even Edmund Spenser dedicated the Shepherd's Calendar to Sidney. But he did not write much more than this because he died younger. But without Philip Sidney, probably English Renaissance would not have been complete. With this, let's move on to the end of the session, my dear friends. Once again, a reminder for you all. Related links are in the description of shorts and videos of all the Lit Valentine. Playlist also available, so you don't want to browse here and there. You can get all the previous videos links immediately. And with thank you, my dear friends. Keep supporting Lit Valentine. Thank you for being with me for the past days and thank you for supporting me. Keep supporting me like that and wait for the interesting next video till the next day. And